All right, so let's start with our first session. I saw that there was quite a lot of expectations from this session, and this session is titled "Is Our Financial System Ready for an Age of Exponential Innovation?" And in our starting video, if you must have heard me say that blockchain is one of the most misunderstood technologies because and one of the reasons is that it's as profound as the foundations of the internet itself. It means that blockchain is allowing us to decentralize trust in such a ways that it can have multiple pronged applications across multiple different areas. And which is why blockchain is one of those technologies which is going to allow us to create different products for different use cases. And today we are going to be talking about the financial innovation. So today's agenda would be we would study uh, into something that's very very fundamental for all of us, fundamental for our civilization, and that is money. And we all use it, we all deal with it, but very few of us actually know how money was created, how money is created, how money works within our economy. And understanding that is very important because there are certain areas where blockchain and certain blockchain applications can help and solve. And today, of course, our focus will be more on Bitcoin, which is it's the first blockchain, it is the first cryptocurrency, and it holds a very very central position amongst in the world of blockchain, because if you must have seen, even the price movements of all of the cryptocurrencies is completely linked to Bitcoin. So in the mass consciousness, everyone understands that Bitcoin is like the mother of cryptocurrency, and it is a currency at one point, and at the same time it's a big innovation in terms of, because Bitcoin was the first blockchain itself. And then we are going to study about what could be the change that Bitcoin could bring. And then we will open up to certain debates of, can a Bitcoin based financial system coexist or complement or change our world? So this is this agenda for today's session. So we have spoken about that there are several different assets, because what I see is that the where blockchain has its fundamental use case is that it allows us to decentralize trust. It allows us, without needing to trust any centralized third party, whether it's a bank, whether it's an institution, whether it's a company. It allows us to manage and store our assets in such a way that we don't need to trust anyone. And those assets could be anything. It could be money, it could be stocks, it could be bonds, it could be titleship, ownership deeds, for example, land records, or if I own a property, the fact that I have an ownership of a property today, you need a centralized body, a government to denote that. But maybe it could be in the future, blockchain could be used for that. It could be used for things like digital arts, ownership of digital arts, intellectual properties. And that's why blockchain is such a varied and vast field, that you have many different kinds of blockchains existing, and over which all these different assets could be created. But today, our focus will be just touching this first part, that is money, because money is the principal asset of the world. Money is the currency with which our life depends on it. It's the asset with which we trade, we create value, we store value. So we are going to today not start with discussing about blockchain, but go a little bit back in our history and start discussing about money, because this is fundamental to understanding blockchain, understanding Bitcoin, and understanding the revolution in finance that can happen. So, what is money? I mean, we have evolved from being hunter gatherers, gathering for food, gathering for clothing, gathering shelter. And then, as human civilization started to evolve, we realized that we needed money. We needed money because how else could we exchange goods? How else could we value goods and services? So, there are basically two types of money, and these are also known as the two definitions of money. One is a credit-based definition of money. What does that mean? That if I suppose I'm a farmer, I've produced some wheat. Now I go and I want to sell that wheat because I need to buy clothes, I need to buy shelter, I have all these other needs. So I go to someone who needs the wheat, but I don't have any needs today. All my needs today are met. So one of the types of money is that money can be credit. That means I give my wheat and the buyer of the wheat tells that he issues, for example, a piece of paper saying, this is a credit that I owe you the value equivalent to one bag of wheat that you have sold me. So money can be credit based, and these credit notes can be issued by anyone. Today, the money we deal, which is known as fiat money, is basically a type of credit money, and we will study more about that how it functions. But then the problem with credit money is that I can write credit, I can write a note saying that I owe you so much, but there has to be some unit in which I have to denominate that value that I owe you. If it's bag of wheat, if it's grain, if it's gold, if it's silver, if it's commodity. So that's where the concept of commodity as a unit for money came about, because it needed to be some commodity that is commonly available to the point that it is fungible. That means people can exchange it. It's not something that's so rare, but at the same time it's not something so scarce that it can suddenly more commodity units of that commodity can be produced and it becomes worthless. So that's why civilizations have practiced and tried different types of commodity money. They have different civilizations have tried wheat, shells, grains, beads, and and finally gold and silver, which became the most prevalent commodity money that has been used over thousands of years. In fact, even just in this century is that we have made this big change of moving away from a commodity based money, which is gold. We'll be discussing about that, but that's quite a recent phenomenon. So again, what is money? And here I would like to tell you that if anyone during my session has any question or would like to contribute or would like to add, I welcome you to just unmute yourself and speak out. And because I want this to be a discussion, it doesn't matter even if I feel that the time is getting too small, I will request that, okay, we need to move fast, but please feel free to open your mic and add and contribute anytime you feel like. So, what exactly is money? And there are three fundamental definitions. I know there are certain economists, or at least students of economics, in this class. So, they will probably go back to their economics textbook. And these are the three main definitions of money. Money is a unit of account because we need to know how we can compare the value of something with respect to another. I am giving you this class, I am teaching this class, but what is the worth of this class, this session that I'm giving you? Is it worthless or is it very valuable? Maybe you as participants would be able to measure it, but then how do we quantify that? And that's why we need money to be a unit of account so that we can measure the value or worth of every single action that we are performing or every single goods or services that we are producing. Second thing is money is a medium of exchange because we cannot always do barter because maybe I'm not interested in what you have, but if we can have this third medium of exchange, we can always exchange every time, even if I'm not interested in what exactly you have. So money is a medium of exchange. And the third big, very important value is money is a store of value. Money is a store of value because I today am young. I can labor, I can work, and I can work hard. But at one time, maybe I'll grow old. At that time, I will not be able to work. Or today, or maybe there will be, or winter will come where my crops will not function. I'm a farmer. I need somehow to store the value of the goods and service produced by me. And I don't want that value to be lost over time. So money is a store of value. And money needs to be all three. Good unit of account, a good medium of exchange, and a good store of value. And human society, we are ingenious. We have evolved so many inventions, innovations throughout our hundreds of years of civilization. But still, as you will see, money is something that we have still not been able to solve. That what will be that perfect money? Because some money are good medium of exchange, but poor store of value, and some are good store of value, but poor medium of exchange. So if we go back in history, in Africa, trade beads was a very, very common phenomena even till the last 100 or 150 years ago. In African tribes and African societies, there used to be certain kinds of rare beads, in certain colors and composition, which were used as a money, as a form of money, because it couldn't be produced. So money, beads were money, and then when European settlers moved in, started looking at that these beads are money in Africa. They had the industrialization. So in Italy, actually, there is a here it says that there is the in that there was a actually a city in Italy where they started in Venice, where they started producing cheaply these beads and mm, flooding the market in Africa with these beads. And with those beads, they could buy whatever commodities, ivory, even slaves could be bought with these trade beads. And this is actually in the history. You can Google it and see. So this shows how money needs to be scarce, and if that scarcity is not there, then the money will completely lose its value and it will collapse. So again, now that we know a little bit more about what money is, what are its attributes? And this is the holy grail that human civilization has been working on for hundreds of years, that what should be really the attributes of sound money. One of them is durability. You don't want money that immediately dissolves. If you have a piece of paper that dissolves overnight, like one of these, when these cashiers print on those papers, the ink disappears. That money is no useless because it's not durable. Or grain, wheat cannot be good money because it will go bad. It's not durable. You need verifiability because everyone should be able to verify what is money. Okay, you need divisibility. You can divide money into smaller segments. You need accessibility. If someone can block your access to money, it's no good because then you cannot trust that money. It needs portability. I can carry it around. It cannot be too heavy. And in today's age, as people started moving about and as communication increased, we need transferability. It shouldn't be just good enough that I can give it to the person next to me. I should be able to transfer it on the other side of the world. All of these attributes are attributes of money as a good medium of exchange, which means it is good for payments. But then money should also have scarcity, because that scarcity would mean it can be a good unit of account because it will be holding its value, and it can be a good store of value. And this is where the problem lies. We have had a history of different kingdoms issuing different kinds of money, and these kingdoms have fallen as their money has fallen because too much of it was produced. And time time and again, what has really stood the test of time is gold. Gold, despite having lots of limitations in terms of its divisibility, in terms of its verifiability, because even to verify gold, it's not so easy that you can verify whether it's true or not. You need certain specialized skills or instruments. But its scarcity means that since gold inflates only at on an average 2% per year, because it requires a lot of energy and work to make mines and mine the gold. Gold has been money through all the at least the last 2 3 thousand years that we can look back in human history, and everything else has failed time and again. In fact, in the Roman times, the coins were issued, and there was the whole concept. Slowly these coins started getting debased because first each coin held a certain amount of gold, and then the gold started to be chipped off because human nature is greedy. When humans can make more money out of nothing, they will try to do that. And that's why all other forms of money have failed here. Now, a good financial system needs financial institutions, it needs financial products. And the basic financial product that was created was banking. So, what was the early banking? We have had a history of banking, but the main large scale banks that, if you go back, was started in Amsterdam around the 1600, where in these banks people could go and deposit their gold, because gold was hard to carry around, gold were hard to transfer. They could deposit those golds and get these little pieces of paper saying that this paper is equivalent to the gold. So this paper said that when you go back, anyone who is holding this paper goes to this bank, he can redeem it back for the gold that he has deposited. And that's why paper money started becoming more and more popular, because but for that people had to trust the bank, that the bank has enough gold, so that if people start going and asking for their money back, that bank should be able to have that amount of gold as the liabilities, that the bank owns. That means the amount of paper that the bank has issued. But since gold has all these problems as being not being a good source of medium, paper money started becoming more and more popular. And paper money, actually, unless until very recently in this century, paper money was issued by private banks. It was not issued by governments or government organizations. In fact, governments had nothing to do with money. Money was abstracted away from governments, and these notes belong to different banks. Um, we can see even this, this is a United States note, which is till very recently in United States, and in fact till 1900 and till early 1900s, you had money issued by various banks in the United States. And um, and the value of the money would be dependent on how trustworthy the bank is. So you had several different types of money existing all at the same time. Now, what happened in the age of telegraph? So, when telegraph started to be invented in the late 1800s, international trade started happening more and more. And we know British Empire was one of the largest empire all over the world, and which is why the the possession of real gold started getting less and less, because people started putting their money in banks. And the Bank of England became one of the largest banks in the world. And and all kinds of commercial entities all over the world could easily wire money using the telegraph, by just informing the bank that I transfer from my account to the account of so and so person. So if someone, a trader in India, wanted to trade with someone in Japan, Bank of England could do that. And that's why the British pound became the most strongest currency, because it was pegged by the Bank of England, it was pegged to the gold. And the Bank of England held that gold standard all the way for 200 years. Bank of England was actually, it was holding that gold standard. If anyone could actually walk in with the note and convert and get their gold back. Now, course, as the with the age of telegraph and globalization, gold became an inefficient form of money, which means the value of gold started to be abstracted away. So slowly and eventually, Bank of England started producing more and more notes than they had actual gold, because they knew no one will actually, not everyone will go and start asking for gold at the same time. It wasn't even practical for the people. So it was fine for certain amount of debasement to take place. But what was a major critical driver was the First World War. And the British government wanted to fight the First World War, because it didn't want Germany to come up as a competitor. There was a lot of competition between these various countries. So that's why British government wanted to fight the war, but it didn't have that money, because at that time, money was not created by governments the way it is created today. And fighting a war meant that they had to issue bonds. So this was one of the posters during that time, that national war bonds was being actually advertised to the people, that if you are patriotic, if you want to help your country to win, please buy these war bonds, so that they can collect money from people and start the fight. But they couldn't sell it, because people were not convinced Germany is a country so far away. It's not even concerned for us. Why we should waste our money to go and fight this war? So that's when Bank of England uh, started buying these bonds out without having enough gold in its coffers. And that's when actually it went completely went out of the gold peg. So public were the people were informed that they could no longer go back and convert their money back for gold, and the British pound had already been debased. And that started this cascading scenario where one by one countries and governments, when they realized that it's possible for me to start debasing in this way, why don't we just go off this gold standard? It's no longer needed. And one by one, competitively, all the countries started going off the gold standard. Well, we
Anish,
know Germany got.
Anish,
Yes, sir.
let me only for you to breathe a bit. Let me only put here some curiosity. Only a couple of years ago, based on an investigation done by several people, we understood, and the people from UK understood and get to know that indeed the Bank of England was pledging, uh, meaning they were issuing more paper money than the reserve they have in gold. Because until a couple of years ago, everybody in that moment understood that the UK, based on the bonds that they issued also, they were a success based on the people of UK that were trying and willing to support the efforts to win the First World War. Which means it's kind of funny that indeed they break the rule without anybody knowing. Only a couple of years ago we understood that. Anish,
Thank
it's
you,
cool.
Ricardo.
Only for you to breathe a bit also.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very interesting and very fascinating. History is indeed very, very interesting. And then what happened? Well, England won the war, and Germany was the loser. So Germany was told that you need to now pay reparations to France and England, and the war reparations was so high that Germany just couldn't pay, and somehow Germany had to pay back in their own currency, which also at that time was pegged to the gold. But because Germany couldn't pay it back, so Germany started hyperinflating its currency, started printing more and more and more of its currency, and for some time, so since you can see since 1914 to 90 onwards, the hyperinflation, first it was slow. So people normally didn't realize that this is how hyperinflation is going to happen, because the way hyperinflation happens is in phases. It inflates, and slowly it got so bad that the German economy got devastated. And there is actually a very interesting book written called The Death of Money. I'll put a link later on the Telegram. And this book describes that, no, the book is called When Money Dies. It describes how the society started breaking down as money started breaking. Like neighbors who used to be very close and friends, they became enemies with each other. The Jews were seen with a lot of jealousy because they were the more successful ones, and as poverty started becoming more and more predominant, complete society broke down. And then you might, and this graph actually shows how the fall of the German, or the value of gold with respect to the German Weimar marks, their currency. And then you would say that why didn't everyone go and just buy gold, because their money was breaking down? If they would have just gone and bought gold, they could be saved. Well, other than the fact that the governments always put in capital controls and seizing and so on, but the way the volatility between German Weimar mark and gold was very high. So you could be buying gold, and then the next month the value of gold could suddenly plummet and then go up a lot, and you could not manage your finances. So that's why it wasn't easy for people to see that their money is going to continue to have this collapse. And we know that there are many participants in this room from certain countries who have experienced, if not this much, but certain amounts of hyperinflation. We are going to talk about that. But this is about the history. And then what was happening in the United States? you had all these paper money issued by different banks. But what was became a common occurrence was bank runs, because these banks were lending out. They were deposit taking gold, issuing as paper money, and then lending out the gold. But they were issuing more paper money than the gold they had, and it has been human nature and institutional nature throughout history. So bank runs became common. There was always this fear of bank runs. When everyone started to go and pick up their money, the banks didn't have the money. And in fact, the Great Depression happened in 1930s, and often economists cite that, but they don't cite that. But the fact is that one of the reasons leading to this Great Depression was earlier an overinflation of the money supply system, a huge bubble building up, and then finally the Great Depression happened. So this has been a volatile period. But then once the Second World War was won and USA was the decisive power, USA asked all the other countries, because all the other countries had already deposited their gold to USA in return for arms and ammunition and weapons. So USA had all the gold of the world, and USA told that, let's trust my US dollar, because my US dollar is going to be pegged to the gold. 135 US dollar will be equal to 1 ounce of gold. So you all can peg your currencies to my dollar, which would be as good as you pegging it to gold. And that's for so from 1946 till 1971, it started a new era, new movement. There was a lot of growth in the economy, and uh, uh, USA was, of course, printing much more dollars than the gold they had, but their bluff was not called by other countries. But when other countries started to realize that maybe the US dollar is not really fully backed, Germany started to ask for its gold. Other countries started to ask for their gold. And then the USA had no option. But in 1971, US President Nixon came and said, we are temporarily suspending the gold withdrawal window. And obviously, when governments do something temporarily, it becomes eventually permanent, because Fort Knox, where all the gold is supposed to be kept, is empty. It doesn't have that gold. And and then that started this whole rethinking amongst economists, and that's when Keynesian economists their theories came to the rescue, saying that maybe we don't need gold, maybe money should not be backed, maybe money supply should not be curtailed. Only thing that should be governed is inflation. If we have kept the inflation under check, maybe expanding the money supply is good for the economy. So which is not a true or false statement. It's a debatable statement. We will come to the debates later on. But then started this era of expanding monetary systems. And 1971, it's not that before that the gold peg was ever properly followed, but at least there was some sort of curbs and controls in terms of the creation of money supply. But since 1971, money supply has been very, very free. And other countries said that if USA does it, why don't we? So other countries also followed the same model. And there had been this big shift in economics, where all the countries started having a very loose monetary policy. Now, in the gold era of the gold standard, we can see the consumer's price inflation levels in the United Kingdom over 200 periods were more or less steady. But in the fiat standard period, it has been exponentially growing consumer price inflation levels. And this has been one of the big results of a loose monetary policy system. Now, what what has also happened is that as we have started moving to a loose monetary policy system, our economy is a debt-based economy, which means debt itself is money. What we consider money as numbers on our bank account are basically liabilities issued by banks every time someone borrows money. So what we call money is a liability for someone else. This is the way our monetary system is functioning. What How the government's function is, governments issues bonds. These bonds are basically liabilities of the governments. So new money supply can constantly be created, And this is how the money supply keeps growing exponentially. This has been the chart of the money supply growth, M2 of the United States. I'll be discussing what is M2 because it's important for you to have some basic financial understanding before we move on to the blockchain part of it. But you can see during the COVID, there has been a huge bump in money supply when all the extra money printing happened in the United States. In Europe also it happened to a slightly lesser degree, but still significant. And US debt to GDP has also been growing exponentially. So what it means is as debt to as a percentage of GDP starts growing, now to fulfill its now I'm talking about government debt. This is US government debt is 140% of its GDP. It's a huge, astounding number, which means if the United States would need to only pay back its interest for the bonds that people are using, for the debt that they have borrowed in the past. And this debt has been borrowed to fight all the wars, to make all the expenses that US has done over the last decades. Now their interest rate payments is more than their military spending, more than many other forms of spending. So which means you need to make more borrowing to pay back the old debts, and you need to keep borrowing more to continue to paying back the old debt. And this is known as a debt spiral. This is, imagine if you have like two credit cards, you can't pay the credit for the first credit card, so you borrow money from the second card to pay the first, and then you borrow money from the third card, and imagine you will get into a spiral because the debt will exponentially increase. And this is where many countries have gotten into. Now USA is the best kid on the basket. It's the USA and Europe are one of the most stable countries. uh, for rest of the world, out of the 180 countries of the world, the majority have had some sort of a expanding, increasing debt supply. And the only way that the old debt can be paid by is either your GDP grows very rapidly, so you're producing more, you get more taxes, and you can keep repaying back. So if you are a very fast growing economy, for example, a country like India has a huge population, they starts from a very low baseline with a lot of poverty, they can expand their GDP very fast. But if when you reach a dead end and your GDP cannot expand faster, the only way you can repay this debt is you have to bring down your interest rates. You have to bring those interest rates low. But then eventually, when inflation kicks in, you are then in the case of a debt spiral, and ultimately your money will start losing its value. That's the now, this is just to give you an understanding of how our money system works. I'm not going to go into the details, but our money system, there are two forms of money in the fiat monetary system. Fiat means the money that's issued by governments or government-backed money, like national currencies. So you have bank reserves that's known as M0 currency. So M0 currency is basically the money that is issued by the central bank, and central bank has an account for different commercial banks. And that's not the money that you and me or that we deal with. What we deal with are with the money of the commercial banks that are issued every time someone goes to a commercial bank and asks for a loan. The commercial bank creates new entries on their ledger, so it issues the loan that becomes an asset for the bank, and that becomes a liability for the borrower. And so every time this process of creating a new loan is created, this new number adds to the monetary supply of the system, and that's known as M2 money supply. So with new loans given by new commercial banks, so when there is a lot of economic activity, the money supply can exponentially grow. And when people are not able to repay that loan in times of recession, in times of crisis, then what happens that money supply, when the loans are paid, the money supply shrinks. But what happens is that in times of crisis, often these banks fail. And when these banks fail, the central banks need to create new money supply to bail out those banks. And the other way that money supply grows is by governments issuing bonds. So when governments issue bonds, these bonds are bought by commercial entities, and ultimately the central banks creates new money to buy those bonds back. And so these are the two mechanisms by which the monetary supply system of the world keeps on increasing. Uh, I'm not going into the further detail of of the plumbing of the system, but then how does the central bank control the system? So the central bank's lever is to control the interest rate. The interest rates means that when interest rates are too low, the more people go to banks to borrow money, so money supply can grow fast. And apparently, the stated objective uh, is that as money supply will grow, the economy will grow, people will borrow, they will buy more houses, and so there is a boom in the economy. But this boom, it's debatable if it's really actually adding to the productivity or it's simply adding to the speculation. There is a boom, but when the inflation goes too high, because now the money supply is too high, the inflation goes high, central banks jacks up the interest rates. So those companies who were used to working with low interest rates, now they cannot function. They will collapse eventually. They'll start breaking down, the economy starts breaking down, jobs are lost, and recession happens. It's very painful. And when people don't have money, obviously inflation comes down. So there is this boom bust cycle that is happening. And by this constant fiddling of the interest rates, putting it too low, then putting it too high, then putting it too low, it creates a lot of inherent instability in the economy. And this is according to Austrian economics point of view, which I'm trying to put forth. Later we can have this debate, because the Keynesian economics, which is the format of economics that is often taught in universities today, uh, recommends this form of control of the interest rates and using the interest rate lever, but it produces this instability of inflation and then deflation, and inflation and then a recessionary deflation, which is quite unstable for the economy. Now, the second question here is that if this entire process of controlling interest rates is being decided by 12 people in a room who have no sort of democratic election, they have not been elected, or they don't have any uh, democratic point point of view. They are simply, often in many countries they are subservient to the government itself. In other countries, more developed countries, they have a sort of independence. But the question is that if the wisdom of 12 people is deciding and controlling the money and the value of assets and the investment and the whole of economy, do we really have a free market? This is one of the questions. And I'm putting these questions because when we talk about Bitcoin, we are going to produce or suggest some alternatives which will have big implications on all of this system by which the economy functions. And those of you who are not very familiar with economy, maybe some of it is too heavy, maybe some of it, but you will still get the overall idea. And my suggestion is that start taking more of an interest in our economy, because it's fundamental to how we function. Now, what happens with this easy money phenomena, where you have on one hand governments creating too much bonds and banks issuing creating a lot of excess money, is those who are closest to either the governments or those who are in positions that they can go to the banks and borrow a large amount of money, they become winners in this economy. They are the winners because they can buy. As money supply grows, what happens? This money supply goes to buy assets, real estate, housing, bond, the stocks, and shares. So these are assets. These assets grow exponentially. That's why interest rate completely determines the rate of growth of these assets. And as these houses are used for speculation by people who can borrow easily, they can borrow money, they can buy houses, allow the house prices to grow up, sell the house, and make more money. So if you can get cheap loans, you can do that. But if you are a working class person who is not able to get access to the loans. What will happen for you? For you, housing will get more and more expensive. Rents will get more and more expensive. And it's seen, if you see from a in unless the country was in a very poor state and has developed, but if you go to a developed country, if you go to United States, and you see the generation before could easily buy houses, but now this generation is struggling to even to be able to buy houses or even rent houses, because the income levels do not grow as fast as inflation grows and as house prices grows. So asset owners benefit, young people suffer, and has been seen all over the world, and in some countries to a very, very big degree. Now, uh, we must also know that there has been another big phenomena over these last few decades. You might say that how is it that the central banks have been able to bring down the interest rates from very high levels? We know 20, 30 years ago, interest rates used to be so high, but inflation has not been so high. In fact, in developed countries, it's been two, three, four. Okay, now during COVID, we saw 10% inflation. But how come the inflation has not been so high? And I would say that and I would say that there are a few ways and there are a few reasons because of which, and the fundamental one is that we have had many. Let me just give me a second. I need to, sorry, disable my Skype, so I don't need I don't. Okay. So, one of the big factors is that we have seen a huge amount of productivity increase in society. We have seen massive productivity increases coming because of technology, because of the internet itself. That has led to globalization, which means now instead of manufacturing in small locations, all of the manufacturing could be done cheaply in China. And that means the prices have come down. So these factors of globalization, immense productivity, technology has been growing exponentially. Technology has been growing at such a massive rate. So those things which used to be very expensive earlier is getting cheaper and cheaper. For instance, things like smartphones, digital cameras, televisions, we know they are getting better and cheaper because we can see it dropping very fast. But it's not just for smartphones or televisions. Oil production has become cheaper because the technology to produce oil is getting smarter. Uh, Production of grains is becoming more and more efficient. Production of food is getting more and more industrialized, so more automated. Production of plastic goods, even in construction material. Earlier, people used to actually chop wood, use wood from forests to make doors. Now we have plastic and PVC, which are better insulators and are cheaper to produce. So we have had this huge efficiency gain, because of which prices should have actually dropped very, very rapidly. But the money supply has also been growing. So you have these two forces. On one hand, you have technology and entrepreneurship, and the competitive nature of entrepreneurship trying to make things cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And on the other hand, you have increased money supply that is trying to make things more and more expensive. And as the central banks say, we need to have this 2% inflation target. So this targeting is there. But even the way we measure inflation is not a science. It's arbitrary, because the factors that you consider in inflation are not have been changing. What food products you produce in your basket of inflation, that has been changing in order to get a lower number, because people's needs are different. People have needs for hospitalization, healthcare. People have needs for housing. People have needs for certain food products which have increased in prices. So even the inflation is not really correctly measured in the actual cost to people, and that's why people have been getting poorer and poorer and poorer over time. But these forces are there. Now what will happen as you expand the money supply, and this money supply expansion keeps on benefiting certain sections of the society who get richer and richer, those who can borrow money, those who can have assets. And as government bonds and the amount issuance grows up, the government also starts becoming bigger and bigger, which means as governments grow bigger, the government start interfering in every aspect of human life. They need to now control everything. And because people don't have enough money, if I need to run a business, I need to ultimately go to the government. It's because the government has to be my customer. It completely shrinks the free market out of it. So capitalism, where free market capitalism starts shrinking when you have this ever expanding monetary supply, the gains of productivity don't go to the society, and you will always have this balance. And how will this balance be maintained over the long period? That is the big question over here. Now, another reason given that we need to keep expanding this money supply is because we need to keep growing the GDP, which itself is flawed. Because if you will remember, when Kodak cameras used to be so prevalent and popular, there used to be a whole industry around it. You used to go and buy those reels from Kodak. There used to be shops selling those reels who had their margin, and then you would click the photos, and then after those clicking those photos, you would need to go and print those photos. And after printing and all that process meant that there used to be chemicals that needs to be used by the shops that print those photos. Now, all of this requires a huge influx in the economy. It means a lot of people get paid, and that means GDP is there. And now, when you have a technology on your hand where you can take thousands of photos, share it with everyone, edit it, do all kind of filtering without needing to use professionals, I'm sorry, there's Skype. I need to find, just give me a second. Let me just disable.
Corbella, you lost the sound.
No, I'm just finding a way to disable Skype, but even if I close the window, it doesn't get disabled. Anyways, during I'll figure it out. So sorry
Sorry
for the
for the
interruption.
interruption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let
So
us
let's
continue.
continue.
Uh,
Uh,
that
that
uh, uh, so I'm
I'm
hearing an
hearing
echo.
echo. Yeah, Anish, we are hearing you with echo.
Okay,
Yeah. Not
just
now.
give me a second.
Cut. Now it's fine, I believe.
Now, can you hear me well?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So GDP does not measure productivity gains. GDP only measures the exchange of money. But as productivity increases, the cost of goods and services reduce, GDP will naturally tend to go down. And the problem here is that in a debt-based system, as GDP goes down, we cannot repay off those old debts. And uh, that's why there will be a debt collapse unless and until the value of money keeps going down, or unless there is inflation. And this is the real reason why central banks need inflation, why governments need inflation. Because when there is inflation, we can pay back those old debts, because now that money is worth less and it's easier to pay it back. And this dichotomy, that massive productivity versus having a debt-based economy, they are not compatible. And this is a reason why the current monetary system cannot exist, or it cannot be sustainable. So now, what happens when government spending goes on increasing? Well, firstly, in the past, you needed people to contribute for fighting a war. Now, when it's easy to increase military spending simply by issuing new bonds, governments will competitively do that, no matter which side of any war you are in. Now, both sides, governments have the ability to keep issuing new bonds and keep increasing military spending, and that's making our world more unsafe than more safe. Government grants are distorting the market. For instance, I can tell you from my experience that there was a project, a very big European Commission project called 5Air, which was built, uh, which spent about 100 million euros to build a platform for startups to develop their product. Okay, many universities were involved, lots of money got spent. When the startups were told now come and use it, they said we can use Google or Amazon's product because they are more easier, simpler, and this is unusable. This is not a platform because you have so many partners developing it, and you have a bureaucracy that's developing it, that this product is not useful for us. And then the European Commission put in an extra 100 million euros saying we'll give grants to startups who develop on our platform simply so that they could show that this platform we developed was actually useful. And this is what happens when you have government's role should is very important and critical in terms of managing the regulations. It's very, very fundamental. But when governments have too much money and the private sector has lesser and lesser money, the way governments spends that money often gets distorted, and it distorts the market, and we have to be very mindful of that. It increases bureaucracy, it increases crony capitalism. Eventually, as governments get too big, it increases authoritarianism, and it distorts democracy. A lean government is a more democratic government, it's a more efficient government, and that's often linked because government interference then goes on to way how agriculture should be done, how food should be produced, how education sectors should be run. And I know when the private sector is not so ready, it's the government has an important role to play, but eventually the innovation of free markets, innovation of teachers in terms of teaching, innovations of whether it's education, whether it's health, ultimately, when the economy and a society matures, it's only free market capitalism that can provide those efficiencies and economies of scale. And that cannot happen when unless if your money supply is constantly getting expanding. So this is some lines of now what has happened across the world is that we are privileged to live in one part of the world where we have had more or less stable systems, so we don't really feel those effects. But there are many countries where hyperinflation has been common. These are just a few. It's not the whole list. Zimbabwe, Lebanon, Syria, Venezuela, Turkey, Argentina, Iran. These are some countries. These are just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure there are participants from some of these countries who can later, maybe tomorrow or later on during our discussion session, share their insights on it. But once the government gets addicted to free and cheap money printing, these balances, because money doesn't fall all of a sudden, the value of money grows and exponentially falls. And when it starts failing, then it fails very, very fast, exactly how we saw in each of these cases in all of these countries. And then when you get into the debt spiral, it's very, very hard to control. Now, I'm giving you an example because I'm going to be moving to the Bitcoin, and that will happen after the break. We will be touching how Bitcoin could have a role in solving this. But Roya Mehboob is a very well-known Afghan uh, lady who is and she's from Afghanistan, and Afghanistan saw this whole collapse, and she was one of the proponents who had actually been using Bitcoin to provide funding to women who are actually developing IT skills in Afghanistan. And when money collapsed in Afghanistan, she used Bitcoin to do that. I just wanted to bring it as one of the case studies, which we'll explore later. But then let us see what has happened with fiat monetary systems in other parts of the world. One of the big factors is that when money starts failing and people want to jump out of that money, then the governments start to impose capital controls. Capital controls means you cannot jump out, because if everyone jumps out, that would lead to the collapse of the government itself. And actually, it's a good thing, because there are many authoritarian regimes, for instance, the Iranian regime or other regimes, who are very, very authoritarian, and the only way they survive is because they have the fiat money printer. And if people do not want, there is no democracy in these countries. If people start moving to an alternate money system, the governments will immediately collapse. They cannot print money and pay their army to control people. So, but that's why governments know that capital controls are important. And in Argentina, in Nigeria, in all these cases, the first thing is you are not allowed to hold any cryptocurrencies. You are not allowed to even hold US dollars. You cannot exchange your money for any other foreign currency. This is the first way where capital controls are imposed. And this is very easy to do with fiat money. In fact, in the case of Argentina, and even in the case of Lebanon, it's the same, that the banks actually had dollar-based accounts. And the banks say that, why you want to go and get dollars or take your export your money outside? You hold it, we will keep you and give you dollars, and if the currency goes down, we will still give you interest, and your money will still stay in dollars. But eventually, what happens is, when these banks collapse or when these governments are failing, they change the interest rate, the exchange rates, because these exchange rates are artificially pegged, and then you lose your money's worth, because those promises are never kept.
Yeah, but the problem, Anish, but the problem in the end of the day, let me interrupt a bit here. The problem in the end of the day is that for most of these developing countries, they go to IMF asking for money, and also for World Bank, and they will borrow the money with the well-known reserve currency of the world, which is the dollar. In the end of the day, they have to pay in dollars, but their country are printing on their fiat money, meaning on Argentina or bolivars or other kinds. And the gap between one currency value and the other currency value, which are in different kind of directions, brings to the collapse that we have today in most of the countries. And more than that, in most of the situations when what you are asking from these developing countries is to produce what other kind of developed countries are needed in that moment, which means in the end of the day, and these are paid in are not are paid, are measured in the hard currency, which is dollar, but paid in their currency, which means in the end of the day to be even more expensive. That's why most of the developing countries or near to developing countries are not yet to developed countries, most of them. And if you look to the history, this is how the things went. And part of this is if you look to the rules of World Bank and also to MFI, when they are negotiating the loan to a developing country, and we can discuss this tomorrow and the other days, you will see that the conditions and the situations are not good for most of the countries. And here in Portugal, the ones which are here, all of us remember when we had here the MFI, meaning when we had here the European Commission controlling our state. It was good from one side, but it was very painful, because the demands which are coming from these entities, most of the demands are not good for economies. Only to put something in perspective, but tomorrow we can discuss this better.
Yeah.
Anish,
Uh,
yeah.
Thank you, Ricardo. Yes, that's really true. But right now, what we are thinking is that, how can individuals be empowered? Because of course, there is
Yeah.
something to be done at the level of governments. But people living in these countries, how can they use, or how can they use Bitcoin to? This is where we are coming to at least safeguard themselves. This is what we will be looking at after the break. But we'll just close with, what are the other issues with fiat monetary system that have happened? Like, bank failures have been growing. Bank failures, because as banks become unstable, and in most cases, the banks if the central bank can print more money and bail out those banks, people get paid back, as it was in the case of the Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank in the United States. But ultimately, that means you are having even more inflation. You are having more monetary supply creation. Even at that time, those people are paid off, but you have then expanded the monetary system supply itself. But what happens in many cases is that the central banks, for some reasons or other, are not creating extra money. And in that case, when we do not have any other option but to keep our money in commercial banks, and when these commercial banks fail, as happened in the case of Cyprus, which is inside the European Schengen zone, inside the Eurozone, when these banks failed, every depositor who had more than 100,000 euro lost, because 100,000 euro is only the insured the amount of the insurance that all bank accounts in Europe are made. And when the banks, suppose banks have made some risky investment and the banks lose, all the people in Cyprus above 100,000, which included lots of businesses, they lost all their money. And the big problem is that you don't have an alternative. You have to keep your money in the bank. You cannot keep everything in cash. There is no other alternative of where you are going to keep your money with. Uh, Now central bank digital currencies, which we'll talk again later, is being introduced as way that you can keep partly some of your money instead of with the commercial bank. You can hold an account with the central bank. But as of today, nothing like that exists. And then this other big area is censorship. Censorship, it's again a debatable thing. Some people may argue that their governments are very just and honorable, and every time they censor someone, they must have very good reasons and valid reasons. And it's good as long as you are not on the side who is getting censored. But we have seen again and again that censorship has been growing, not only in developing countries, but even in developed countries. The most famous or infamous case was when there was peaceful protesters, the truckers in Canada, who were protesting against their right and free choice to be vaccinated or not. Trudeau froze not only the protesters' bank account, but anyone who had donated any money to these truckers. And a large part of population felt that they have a right to peaceful protest. It's part of the democracy. And even in a developed country like Canada, this has happened. And then that was one area when many of these protesters realized that they might should be using something like Bitcoin in order, because their bank accounts was frozen, and then they couldn't even they were not companies, they were individuals, and they had expenses, they had bills to pay, they had families to take care of, and they were in a very difficult situation. Here in Iran, there was this case where the bank accounts of every woman who doesn't wear a hijab will be blocked. So governments, when you're not on the side of what they actually want, can go and block bank accounts. In fact, in Portugal, I know many cases where anyone who has used a Millennium Bank, even some other banks were the case, to just buy a crypto or send money to a crypto exchange, their bank accounts got blocked. They had to then spend 2 3 weeks to get it unblocked. In the UK, there was this case where uh, Nigel Farage, the right-wing politician, he was blocked. The bank told him you should close your bank account, and lots of people actually have been debanked, because when you are not following certain or you are on the political opponent side, it's very easy for the governments to use bank accounts to for censorship purposes.
No,
This is
it's quite simple. I can give you my example. Since the last 3 weeks, I was making a regular transfer to Coinbase from a bank in Portugal. I'm not naming the bank. And a couple of weeks ago, I cannot do it anymore because I was blocked. And this
incredible.
can happen. And this can happen. And yeah, and we don't know anything why we were blocked. Meaning the periodic transfer was blocked, and that's all. Nobody is explaining why. only
Right.
to give my
But it
experience.
hasn't. I'm sorry, it hasn't blocked. It hasn't. Oh no, Coinbase. Sorry, I thought it was Binance. Binance
No, no,
lost a
no.
couple
It
of
was
SIPO.
no,
Yeah,
no.
yeah,
Binance,
Coinbase.
Binance. I was doing coin. Yeah, I was giving the example of Coinbase because Coinbase is regulated and Binance is not. We will have ways to discuss this during the course. But I was giving the example of Coinbase only because of that. Because with Binance, it's quite simple to this kind of things happen. And with Coinbase, it's quite
Coinbase maintained all of the SEPA partners, didn't they?
exactly,
Europe.
exactly, exactly.
And other than censorship, there is also this issue that when we want to make international transfers, it is expensive but possible among certain countries. But in certain parts of the world, international bank transfers are really, really almost impossible or takes too much time. The SWIFT payment systems, gateways. So that's another problem. And then there is this problem of unbanked that although we are in the 21st century, we have huge amounts of population that do not hold a bank account. And it's especially in the Arab world, in the sub-Saharan Africa, even in Latin America, these percentages, they have been coming down, but they are still too high. In Africa, uh, I have spoken to many Africans, and they tell that owning a bank account is like a privilege. It's for rich people. Many banks don't care. They only want to cater to the rich. So they charge an exorbitant fee to have a bank account. And and since the governments themselves are quite ineffective, there is no respite for these people. That's why M-Pesa was one of the financial revolutions in Africa, grew so popular because it was so hard to for a poor person in Africa to go and open a bank account because the banks don't service them. So this is one issue. And then there is the issue of sanctions. I mean, now from a Western point of view, because the world has been controlled by United States and we are and Europe, we are on the same black block,
And
the
and
Western
and
bloc.
Swift is controlled by US.
Yeah. So primarily, I mean, we had the whole world's economy being controlled by the US. So anyone who's not friends with the US is a bad country. I'm not going, maybe these governments are really bad. Okay, but sanctions means half the world is sanctioned. So half the world is sanctioned means half the population of the world can no longer have bank accounts. They are firstly locked and stuck to their oppressive regimes, but they cannot even open a bank account in Binance. I have my wife is from Iran, and I was helping her brother to open on Binance. Told them because of US pressure, we cannot serve Iranians. So now they are stuck with their melting Iranian currency where they are losing their value, and they cannot even open a bank account or an account in a crypto exchange because their country is sanctioned. So it's a double whammy for the people living in these countries, and which is not fair. So which is one of the reasons we do really need an alternative system which is not controlled by a single government or a set of government or any government at all, which is what we are going to come to. And then lastly, with this breaking down of with the war in Ukraine and breaking down of relations between Russia and and the and the world realizing that the US dollars are getting so inflated that they don't want to hold the US bonds anymore, and people don't, and many countries, especially on the other side of the bloc, China, Russia, many other countries don't want to do business in US dollars because they know they can be sanctioned anytime. And other countries don't want to hold US bonds anytime because it's a asset that is losing value. So there some of these central banks have started buying gold, but the problem is gold still has this problem. What we explained, gold cannot be a solution for its inherent nature, and the fact that the gold price is easily manipulated because there is a lot more paper gold issued than the real gold that exists in the world. So when US dollar system is breaking down, countries need to do trade in each other. Which currency will they use? There is no solution today as of now. that is why US dollar is still being used, and it will continue to be used because a lot of debts are denominated in US dollar, and it's still the most stable, strongest currency. But eventually, as it fragments and all the fiat currencies start losing its value, how do countries do trade with each other? How do individuals do trade with each other? And there are many solutions. One of the solution is for some categories, because I listed many problems. For some people in developing countries whose money is losing value, US dollar is a solution, but they cannot get access to dollars because often it's banned. There are capital controls. Physical access to physical dollar is often hard. And physical cash is in the 21st century is not a solution. Gold, again, gold value is controlled. Gold is not a commodity that you can do buying and selling easily with. It can not be a good currency. So there are only two blockchain-based solutions that fit the bill. One is stable coins, that is US dollar pegged coins, which will be discussed further in other chapters. So there are these coins issued by some of them private, most of them are private issuers who hold dollar bonds and then issue those tokens. But then again, the problem for people with countries in sanctions is that if tomorrow US government says that no, and if it gives a directive to these companies that you should block the accounts of everyone who is in these sanctioned countries, they will lose their assets and they will use the USDC. And then the fourth option is Bitcoin, which is what we will be discussing after the break. So we will have a break of 30 minutes for you to go refresh, relax a little. It's 7:37, so 10:07 we will restart. We can start if you have some points to add. So we will have 20 minutes of discussion, and then we will start talking about what Bitcoin is and see if Bitcoin really is a solution or it is not a solution to the problems that we have explored in this section. Thank you.
Okay, see you all in half an hour, meaning we are talking about 8:10, and we meet again. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.